Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's been kind of a long time since I made a video, and that's because I've been doing a ton of traveling. I've got a Tacoma now instead of the 4Runner that I had, and I've been trying to get my feelers out for finding another Tacoma that I can use to do a transmission swap and developing some products for my company in order to get this Tacoma to be the very best version of itself. Because of that, I want to make a couple videos of my progress on this Tacoma, and today we're going to be doing the brakes. This is a 2003 Tacoma, however the process for doing the brakes is going to be similar for all of the 95.5 to 2004 Tacomas. The process will be similar for any of the 96 to 2002 4Runners. The process will be similar for any of the first gen Sequoias. The process will be similar for any of the first gen Tundras, and the process will be similar for all of the T100s. So follow along. I'm going to show you a couple of things that are important when it comes to the rear brake shoes and adjusting your e-brake. And we're just going to move along and hopefully get the brakes done, an oil change done, check my air filter because I was in a dusty area, and get this thing so that it stops on a dime. So I'm going to spin the camera around. We'll just go through the parts that I'm using and then we'll jump right into it. I'll see you guys at the back of the truck. Okay, for these brakes, we've got a couple of things going on. I've got the front brakes over here. These are just the pads, and we have a Toyota part number for you right there at the top. It's 04465-35260. These are just some factory Toyota pads. And then over here, I've got the shoes for the drums. Now these shoes, you do want to get, in my opinion, a new spring kit when you get these. I've just gone with Duralast because I have a Advanced Auto Parts not down the road from me, so it makes this easy. So this top kit with the springs and the pins is going to be an H7365A, and then the actual shoes themselves, 764 for those shoes. And then I'll go ahead and show you what those look like and why it's important to replace these. These shoes, they are a half moon shape, and this is actually, this outer part here is your pad. And what happens is these shoes are in a set, and they, when you brake, they expand on the inside of that drum. And what happens over time is these pads, they wear down, and then it's just going to be metal here. This metal lip will just wear on your drum, and then you'll either wear your drums out, your braking will cease altogether, you'll cook your rear brakes, and your brake fluid will boil over, and all of those are bad scenarios. So I need to get these taken care of. I've never taken this drum apart since I've owned this truck, and I really just want to make sure that my braking is top-notch moving forward. So those are the parts that we're using. I'm going to block off the front tires so that the vehicle does not move, and I'm going to release the e-brake before I take anything else apart. So I'm going to set that up for you, and then I'll spin the camera around and we'll get down over by the wheel. Okay, so with the e-brake off, the front tire blocked, the e-locker unlocked, I should be able to, with this wheel off the ground, move it slightly, and I am able to do that. So that tells me I'm not all braked up in here, and I have the ability to slide the drum off. So I'm gonna get my hubcap off, which for me is just a pry with a screwdriver, and then I'm gonna zip this wheel and tire off, and we'll take a look at the drum itself. Okay, from this angle, you get a pretty good view of the drum, and you can see that just because I know that I'm gonna have to be pulling on this thing, I went ahead and added in a jack just to keep the truck a little more stable. I'm gonna leave the floor jack under the axle, but this is super stable. I've given this the shake test, but I'll do it again just so you all can see it. We're not going anywhere. You just heard the brake moving in the back. So anyways, this drum, it is released. You can see that it's not locked up, but it is stuck onto the wheel hub itself. And there's a couple of ways that you can get this off. A couple of these holes here are actually threaded so that you can drive bolts in and along a surface that's flat inside of here, and the drum should move off. Now, I've done that lots of times before, and what I end up doing more often than not is stripping the threads. I'll give it a try here, but what works best for me is tapping around the drum with a hammer to free it up and hitting it with some PB Blaster or Brake Clean to kind of loosen up any of the sediment that could be holding this drum on. So I'm going to do that now, and I will report back with the results as soon as I'm done. Okay, so that drum actually came off fairly easy. I hit it with some brake clean and I tapped it with a hammer, but I also employed the 2 screw trick like we talked about before, the 2 bolt trick. And what those do is they protrude out the back and they press on this surface here on the hub, and that allows, with some pressure, the assembly to come off. And then you can take a look inside. Now, you can see a couple of things right away. There is still some pad life here on this particular shoe. There's pad life on that shoe as well, which means that's good. I'm getting an even wear. But the amount of dirt in here and the dark streaks on those pads, they tell me that I was running hot in the rear, which is true. I burned up the brakes the other day coming down a particularly steep hill, and I could smell it coming from the rear. And so I'm assuming that that burning is where these pads, they didn't necessarily fail because I was able to stop, but I lost brakes for a little while, and I'm assuming that that burning is a part of what happened. Now, another thing to note when you do burn up your brakes is you're much more likely to have these pads crack. Now, I haven't taken the other side apart yet, of course, but I'm assuming that the other side is going to be in worse shape than this one, just based on how much I could smell from the driver's seat. So I am going to get this cleaned up. I'm going to spray a bunch of brake clean inside of here, get this cleaned up as much as I possibly can. And then I'm going to show you some of the inner workings in here. This is the e-brake ratchet mechanism, so we'll take a look at that. And then you want to make sure that you know where all of your springs go. The best thing that you can do is take a picture, top and bottom, of how all your springs are set up in here. So that way when you're putting it back together, you know a couple of things right off the bat. You know the orientation of your shoes, you know the orientation of the springs within the shoes, and you know how your e-brake ratchet mechanism is set up. So I'm going to clean this up a little bit, and then we'll take a look at it before I take it apart. Okay, so all I've done is spray what's going on in here with some brake parts cleaner, and I haven't really wiped anything down, but I think you're going to get a much better understanding of what's going on here. So at the top here, you have your actual piston. So this is fed by the fluid from your brake reservoir up in the engine bay. And when you press on your brake pedal inside the vehicle, this piston expands out in either direction, forcing those shoes outward, like we spoke about earlier, and up against the inside of the drum itself. Now, I've cleaned the inside of the drum. There's no damage inside my drum, so I'm going to keep those. I don't think they need to be replaced yet. But let's take a look at some of the rest of the stuff in here. So you can see that this bar in here has a ratchet mechanism in the middle, and what happens is this ratchet mechanism right here, it's locked in place by a retaining bar behind it. You can see it move as I press on it. And over time, when your brakes wear out or break in, that ratchet mechanism becomes tighter so that your e-brake does not lose its tightness. So there are threads on this rod, and when it ratchets, that ratcheting piece slowly expands outwards to keep pressure on these pads so that you should have consistent braking throughout the entire wear use of your brake shoes. Now that's good in theory, and you can see that it's directly attached to this pivoting piece over here. So when you pull on your e-brake, which is connected to a lever down on the other side, this lever it's connected with a wire right here. You can't see because it's under the hub, but you pull on this, which expands this shoe, and that is your e-brake mechanism. So you can see too, when I watch right there, when I pull on this, see how that mechanism, it's trying to ratchet the next tooth, but I'm basically maxed out for where I can be. So that tells me that a couple of things have occurred. One, this ratchet mechanism may be stuck. Two, it needs to be cleaned. Three, it needs to be checked to make sure that these are the correct shoes and that these shoes don't need to be replaced, etc., etc. What I'm getting at is it's a very good thing that I'm in here inspecting these and getting ready to take them apart. So you have a couple of other things that are in here keeping everything connected and tight. You have these retaining springs right here that are on clips with pins that go all the way back through the brake assembly, and those keep these shoes on in a forward and backward place so that they can pivot in and out when need be. You have a spring down at the bottom that holds the shoes together at the bottom, and then you have this cross spring here that holds the shoes together at the top. So the shoes are kept together at the bottom with that spring, at the top with that spring, and forward and back with this spring. So they're really locked in place. They can only pivot like this or in and out. The final piece of this whole thing is the spring that runs back here for the ratchet mechanism that we talked about earlier. And I'm going to take all of this apart, take photos like we talked about earlier, clean everything, and then get everything put back together with this ratchet mechanism in the most narrowed position. And I'll show you how I do that. I think it's also worth noting as I go through here to show you things that you want to avoid. And I've just found the first thing that I want to avoid, and forgive me, I'm gonna move the camera, so hopefully it's nice and smooth moving here. But I'm gonna try to zoom in on something I want you to take a look at. So we're at 1x zoom. Oh yeah, 3 is just right. So I'm gonna move the camera just a little bit more so that I can focus. Okay, so I'm showing you now this piece right here. This is by most people's account called the horseshoe. And you can see that this horseshoe is, one, it's loose. I can move it with my finger, so that's the first sign. But the second sign is the tabs on the end of the horseshoe. Can you see that at the end of my fingertip where it's damaged a little bit? So this horseshoe was already removed and reused once. So that's one of the reasons I like getting a spring kit when I do this, is so I can for sure put on a new horseshoe every time, and I don't have to worry about that damage. You know, that piece could break and I could lose one of the pieces of functionality inside of this brake drum had I not gotten a new spring kit. So it's just important to take a look at these things that either need repair or replace when you are going through this, because this should not be this loose and there should be no damage here on these ends. And obviously there's damage. This was a reused part. So I'm gonna get this removed and taken care of, but it's just something that you can pay attention to moving forward, is take a look at what parts are in kind of disrepair and make your judgment call. I'm not big on reusing brake parts, but you know, one reuse is probably okay, like this person before me did, but I'm going to be replacing them at this point. Okay, so all I've done is pop off that little horseshoe piece, and I want to show you that again, just so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. See how this piece is no longer flat? If I hold it like that, you'll get a much better view of it. See that? See how it's bent up? So the best way to get these is with a pair of snap ring pliers. Just open it up and they'll pop right off. But you can take a look now at the inside of the assembly, and all that I've done from the bottom is pop this wire end out of this tab here, and that allows me to get some free movement in this. And so with that horseshoe off, you can see I have a little bit more play in here. And so now I'm going to be releasing the pressure on this ratchet like we talked about. So I've already freed mine up with a screwdriver. So there's a little bit of grease on mine right in here. Whoa, I'm sorry, right in here on these threads. But usually you can just do this with a finger. And so what I'm going to show you is, again, push back on that lock mechanism. And then I'm going to rotate in the downward position to loosen the assembly. So hopefully you can see, I know it's kind of blurry, I apologize, but you can see that I can rotate that assembly down. You know you're in the compression when, if you go up, you're gonna hear clicking. Hear that? That means it's expanding, because you won't be able to rotate down. You'll be held by the retainer in the back. So go ahead and push in on that retainer and then rotate down to compress the assembly. So now we're just slowly compressing this, and it's going to be kind of tight, and it's kind of an awkward angle, but you should be able to compress it even more than I have. Now my threads are pretty dirty, so it's giving me the runaround here. Another way that you can do it if you're having trouble just using your finger is take a flat end screwdriver. Don't pry on this, but you can press in on that retainer again, and then just rotate it from the top down like this. Now you're only going to get a few teeth at a time when you do it like this, but you are going to be able to very slowly get those last few threads that you want to get to fully compress this assembly. So Anyways, I'm gonna get that fully compressed and then I'll show you how I get it out of there. Okay, so I've gone ahead and removed a couple of components that we've already talked about. This is the retainer for this ratchet right here. You can see that it just hooks on to a pin on the end. So I've just went ahead and slipped that off, and I will clean that. And then I took a pair of pliers and pulled off this lower spring. Now you can see the bend in the spring right there, and that's one of the reasons I like to replace these, is because sometimes removing them, you bend them. I mean, these things heat up and they cool down and they expand and contract so many times over and over and over again, and they'll start to lose their springiness after a certain amount of time. So you can see right there, there's a bend. Some of you might be able to get that off without bending it. I know that I have a new spring kit, so I chose to just get it off the easiest way possible. So that's what I did there. We already talked about the horseshoe mechanism up here, but what I wanted to show you is, see how much free space I have now? I'm bottomed out as much as I can possibly go in this ratchet mechanism here. Now it's actually, this is a Y shape, and it is hooked like this around both the shoe and that mechanism. So they both are sitting in there in that Y, but you can see that I have mobility now where I didn't have that before. So I can go ahead, now that I've got that lower spring out, I can remove I can do a couple of things here, to be honest with you. I could remove the pins that hold them front to back. I could remove this spring right here, knowing that I could damage it, but I'm going to be replacing it. I could pop this back spring off that holds the retainer in place. I'm going to start by getting this back spring off and just kind of unhooking this retainer from where it's at. It's actually on this pivot point right here, so I'm not gonna be able to get it all the way off, but I do wanna just remove some of the tension on it, and then I'm gonna take these forward and back holding springs off. And what they are is just a little T, so you compress it, rotate it, and then they pop off. You'll see what I'm talking about if you've got this in front of you. Anyways, I will be rejoined with you guys in just a few minutes. Okay, so just like we talked about, there are those retaining pins. These go all the way through, and you can see that they have, a flat spot like that. And these are slotted. So what they do is it goes through here and then rotates, and it pulls right there. And all you do is rotate them and they pop right off. The spring that holds on the retainer pops off super easy. It actually protrudes through a small hole right here, and you can pop that off. And now the retainer is just hanging back there. But because I've got the actual shoes off, now they're just hanging there as well. So these shoes are only held on with the tension now of this spring. So all I have to do is overcome the tension of this spring. I'm gonna pivot the shoes like this and pull them out. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do this on camera, but I'm gonna give it a shot just to show you what I'm talking about. It's kind of hard. I'm holding myself around the back of the camera here, but all I have to do is get that out of there, get that out of there, and then I can pivot these up and around. And there you go. So there's my assembly. There is my ratchet mechanism and that upper spring. So this is exactly how I'm gonna put them back on as well. I'm gonna reorient the shoes in this way and then put them on. But there's my hub assembly. I'm gonna get this cleaned up, and I'm gonna get the new pads shoes on and clean up my ratchet mechanism. Okay, with everything put back together in the order that it was removed and cleaned up, you can see we've got the new shoes on, new spring here, new spring here. This spring right here that holds on the retainer is actually the only one that I had to reuse, and it was not in my kit. And there are 4 of these little pucks. They look like this, and my kit only had 2. So I've reused the 2 bottom ones. I'm using 2 new top ones, and I've got my new cross pins in. I've got my new horseshoe on and tightened down. So the only thing that I want to show you now as we're getting through this is, see how there is still some movement in the system right here. It's right there, and if I do this, holding everything together, see how there's a little bit of a gap there? What I want to do is make sure that all of that play is taken out of this system before I put my drum back on. I want to make sure that it's nice and tight when I'm going to put my drum back on, because when I use my e-brake, I don't want it to have to overcome this distance before it starts tightening. I want it to be ready to tighten the second I hit my e-brake. So I'm pretty good there. It should be fairly tight when you go to put your drum back on, which is what I'm gonna do right now. So I'll get my drum back on, and then I will go in and do a brake check and I'll pull the e-brake and we'll see if it's nice and tight. Okay, so my drum is on and you can see that I have that same amount of movement that we had before, which means that my brakes are not locked up. I'm gonna go in and pull the e-brake now, and I've got the mic on. Hopefully you'll be able to hear the articulation in the e-brake as you see it. So, door open, and then pull on that e-brake. Okay, and now we'll check to see if it needs to be adjusted. Now, again, these are self-adjusting over time, but I'd like to get it nice and tight to start. And yeah, you can see I've still got some movement. It's less than it was before. Well, maybe not. So yeah, you can see I'm gonna have to go in and adjust this from the rear, and I will show you how to do that right now. I apologize for the angle. It's very difficult to get back in here to show you what I want to show you, but this plug on the back of the drum right there, you can see I've already partially pried it off. You want to go ahead and take that plug out, and then if you reach a screwdriver in there, you actually have access to the back of the ratcheting mechanism for the e-brake. So what you want to do is ratchet that mechanism until just before tight on your drum, and then go actuate your e-brake and make sure that it's nice and tight. This is how you will do your first preset on your e-brake before you actually start driving. Okay, so having done my preliminary adjustment on the drum, you can see I've still got nice free movement with no e-brake applied. And then if I just apply some pressure on the e-brake from the back, oh, excuse me, I'm moving the phone as I'm doing that. No movement of the drum itself. So I've got my preliminary set. I'm going to put in a new rubber plug on the back where that tensioner was, and it's rinse and repeat for the other side. So this should have your e-brake nice and tensioned again, new shoes, all your springs are set, and you know that they're correct because you took photos and you just redid what you did when you took them off. Yeah, this is not a bad setup. I'll move up to the front as soon as I'm done wrapping up the rears, and we'll take a look at how easy those pads are up front because there is absolutely nothing to them. So I'm gonna get this slapped back together. And then the last thing I wanna remind you of is there are break-in procedures. They're gonna be different for every manufacturer. So look up the break-in procedures for your brakes as you are moving through your first couple of drives after installation. So anyways, I'm gonna switch around to the other side, get that wrapped up, and then I'll meet you guys up in the front of the vehicle. Okay, like we talked about with the rears, the fronts are even easier. So I've got the e-brake pulled because we've just tightened that and everything is nice and tight back there. I've just got the front lifted up, and all we're going to do is take the pads out of here. You don't need to take your caliper off. And then I'm just going to clean my rotor, and that's going to be it for this front end for today. My rotor has plenty of life left on it. I don't have anything that's catching here, which is an indication that you have ground too deep into your rotor, but I have plenty of life left in this thing. So I'm gonna get it cleaned up, get some of this nastiness off of here, and then get these pads out, and I'll show you how I do that. So here's a look at the brake pad area from the front. You can see I actually have a lot of life left in these brake pads on paper, but like I told you, I burned my brakes up and didn't have any brakes for about 15 minutes. So that's just a good indicator that these brakes are old and need to be replaced, despite the fact that there's plenty of life left in the pad itself. So these are pretty easy to get off. There's a retainer right here. So all you do is pop the retainer out and then pull it out of the pins. So it just looks like that. And then your pins will just press from the back through, and then you can pull them out. There's a spring here that keeps tension on the front of your pads. We'll just go ahead and pop that out. There you go. And now you have access to your pads, and they are right there. And the camera's a bit in the way for me to get at these, but I can just wiggle these with a pair of pliers up and out. You can see they are coming out here. There you go, there's the first pad out. And then with that one out, it should be easier to get this second pad out. And there you go. So I can see that I'm greased up on the back. So what I'm gonna do is clean this area, get those new pads in, and put everything back together the same way it came apart. And just like that, we're all wrapped up with the new brake pads in place. I'm gonna get in once I've done the other side and pump the brakes, check my brake fluid, see if I need to add any more, and get my wheels and tires back on and go for a drive. Now again, like I said earlier, there's a break-in period, so make sure that you break your brakes in correctly. Follow the manufacturer spec for your specific brakes, and good luck out there on the road. This has been a short video on how to do your brakes. Brakes are not difficult to do. Don't let brake drums scare you, but certainly don't let brake pads scare you. So anyways, I'm going to wrap this up, get my oil changed, and go for a drive. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch up with you guys in the next one.